Okay, so today's lecture is going to deal with the integumentary system and the special senses. So we'll get right into it. So the membranes of the body, or the integument, is comprised of three different types of functions. Okay, one, they cover body surfaces, they line cavities, and they form protective sheets around your organs. Okay, one type of body membrane that we have are called epithelial membranes. And these epithelial membranes come in three varieties. One is the cutaneous variety. We have the mucous membranes, and we're going to go through each one of these individually. And we have serous membranes, which are another type of epithelial membrane that are found in the body. Okay, connective tissue membranes are a different type of membrane, separate from epithelial. And the one connective membrane that we're going to look at are called synovial membranes, which are found in your joints. Okay, so let's start with our cutaneous membrane, which is our skin. All right, so anytime you see cutaneous, it refers to your skin. Okay, this membrane is dry. Okay, it's the outermost protective barrier that's on the surface of your body. It's the superficial epidermis, and it's composed of what we call keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. Okay, keratinized in this case, it refers to a chemical called keratin. Okay, and keratin is going to be found in your skin, your nails, your hair. And keratin basically means that the cells are dead. Okay, and that's going to be important because things like bacteria or viruses or fungus typically don't like dead tissue. They don't like to grow, or they're unable to grow in dead tissue. They like living vascular tissue that has lots of nutrients so that they can go through their processes and divide and replicate. Okay, but in keratinized cells, viruses and bacteria and things that can make you sick don't really function well. So that's a good thing for us, right? We want our most superficial layer to be keratinized cells so that it makes it harder for the bacteria and other pathogens to infect us. Stratified squamous epithelium. So squamous is a type of epithelial cell. Epithelial cells are cells that line your body cavities and the surface of your body. Squamous refers to the shape, right? So squamous cells are kind of like irregular shaped. They kind of look like fried eggs with a circle in the middle. That circle is the nucleus, okay? And then around it is the cytoplasm and the cell membrane and things like that. Stratified means that they are layered on top of one another. So you'll have these cells kind of layered on top of one another, okay? In strata or in layers, okay? So the epidermis is superficial, which means it's on top, right? And the dermis is underneath, okay? It's underlying. So epi means on top of, right? What's the epidermis on top of? The dermis, right? So dermis is below, epidermis is above that dermis, okay? And that underlying dermis is mostly dense connective tissue, and we'll talk about that in a moment, okay? Mucous membranes. Okay, mucous membranes come in different varieties, different types. Okay, some of them can be stratified squamous, or these layered squamosal cells. Some of them could be columnar epithelial cells. And the difference between columnar and squamous is, again, the shape, right? So squamous is going to be these irregular shaped, fried egg looking cells that are stacked on top of one another. And then you have something called simple columnar. Simple means they're not stacked. Simple means it's a single layer. So instead of many layers like stratified squamous, simple columnar come in one layer. And why are they called columnar? Because they look like columns, right? They look like rectangles with the nucleus towards one end. Okay, but this is one layer. Okay, if they were stratified columnar, which that does exist, but not what we're talking about, they would be layered on top of one another like this. So this would be 2 layers. Okay, but we don't want that. Okay, so simple columnar is 1 layer of columnar cells, where stratified squamous are layered on top of one another like that. Okay, where do we find these mucous membranes? We find these mucous membranes in our mouth, in our esophagus, the digestive tract, okay, the stomach, the large and small intestines, things like that. Okay, all of these places produce mucus. Okay, your mouth produces mucus, your esophagus, your digestive system, your stomach, your small and large intestines. Mucus is very important in these areas, especially that areas that come into a lot of contact with other things. And those are going to produce mucus that are vital to the functions of those particular organs. Okay, they have a loose underlying connective tissue called the lamina propria. These line all of the body cavities that are open to the exterior of the body surface, right? So your mouth is open to the exterior. You put food into your esophagus that came from the exterior. Your stomach is exposed to that. Okay, all these different cavities are exposed to things on the outside of the body. Okay, your spleen is not necessarily open to the exterior of the body. Okay, so that's why it's not included in there, but your digestive system would be. Okay, your lungs as well. The lining of your lungs is open to the exterior, right? Air that you inhale is coming from the exterior, and your lungs produce mucus, right? That's one thing that your lungs produce to keep you safe and healthy. Okay, and these are often adapted for these 2 specific functions, absorption or secretion. Okay, if you think about the mouth and the esophagus, okay, the mouth is going to secrete, okay, amylase and things like that, secrete mucus. But the mouth can also absorb things, right? You can put things in your mouth that get dissolved and absorbed in your mouth. Okay, the esophagus, okay, same thing. Digestive tract, absorption, right? Absorption of nutrients. The stomach, secretion of acids to help you break down food. Okay, so all of these mucous membranes are going to have either an absorption or a secretion role to play. Here you can see these are all the mucous membranes of in our different systems. So we see mucous membranes in our nasal passages, our sinuses, right? Our mouth, okay, trachea, esophagus, okay, the bronchioles of our lungs, okay, the lining of the stomach. Okay, it would go down even more. If you had more of a picture, you would see the intestines also have mucous membranes in them as well. Okay, but again, they line these cavities that are exposed to the outside elements, right? All of these cavities that are exposed are going to be lined with mucus, and that mucus is there to protect you. It's also there to help move things around, right? We want the mucus to catch things that we inhale in our lungs and in our nose, so that it can kind of be filtered so that certain things don't get into the body. Okay, we want the stomach to produce lots of mucus to kind of protect itself from all the acid that it makes and the digestive enzymes that it creates to help you break down foods into nutrients. Okay, the synovial membranes. Okay, these are found in only specific places. Okay, synovial membranes are going to be found in what we call synovial joints. What we see here is a very typical joint between 2 movable bones. Okay, we have 3 different types of joints. We have movable, we have immovable, and we have slightly movable joints. Okay, so we see these synovial joints in freely movable joints. Okay, these are joints like your hips, your elbows, your shoulders, your ankles, your knees, your fingers. Okay, all of these things are freely movable. Slightly movable joints would be like your ribs. They're slightly movable. Your skull is an immovable joint, right? The bones between or the joints between your frontal bone and your parietal bones, or parietal bones and occipital bones. Those are immovable joints because they don't move around without some type of force, right? This example here, this could be, it looks to me like it's like fingers, right? This could be a proximal, this could be a proximal phalange, and this could be a distal phalange, and this could be the knuckle in between, right? I don't see, it doesn't look like a humerus and an ulna or a radius. It doesn't look like a tibia and a femur. Okay, it looks like two finger bones or maybe even, toe bones. Okay, but what we see in between these two bones is a capsule, and this is called the synovial capsule. Okay, and that the lining of this capsule is the synovial membrane, and it's going to secrete fluid that we call synovial fluid. Okay, and that fluid inside is going to act kind of like hydraulics in a car, where it's going to stop these two bones from colliding into one another all the time, right? If we had forces, like say this was your knee joint, and every time you jumped and landed on your feet, your femur and your tibia would hit into each other. Okay, if you took two rocks and you hit them against each other enough, what's going to happen to the rocks, right? They're going to break, they're going to chip, they're going to wear down. Okay, and we don't want that to happen to our bones, right? We don't want our bones to chip and wear down and erode over time, even though sometimes that does happen. We call that arthritis and things like that. But this synovial joint here is to, the main goal of it is to reduce the forces between the two bones here so that they are protected, right? And it does so with this liquid, right? It's kind of like I said before, hydraulics in a car. If you want to even think of a water balloon, right? If I had a water balloon and it was full of water, and I take this bone and I push it down onto the water balloon, and I take this bone and I push it up into this water balloon, it's going to look like this, right? It's going to bend that water balloon, and that water balloon is kind of going to create this kind of protective layer around whatever's pressing into it, right? And hopefully that's enough to keep these bones safe and protected from hitting into one another like that. Okay. So going back again to the cutaneous membrane or the skin. Okay, the skin has lots of stuff in it that we want to talk about. There are things that are in skin that are called derivatives. Okay, and these are all the derivatives that we find in our skin. Okay, we find sweat glands, oil glands, hair, nails, nerve endings, blood vessels. Okay, if we're in a human anatomy course, so these are the things we talk about. But if it was a comparative anatomy course, or if it was a veterinary animal anatomy course, you would include the hooves, you would include horns or antlers. All of those things would be skin derivatives of other animals. Okay, but we're talking about humans. Okay. So what we have here are different functions of the integumentary system. I do want you to know these. Okay, it's very helpful that you know what the skin does and how it protects you. So let's just talk about a couple of these and look at the notes here. Okay, your skin protects you against various things, right? The thing that we think of most often is mechanical damage. Okay, if you bump into something or something hits you, your skin is going to take that immediate impact and the immediate brunt of whatever force it is that's hitting you. Okay, it forms a physical barrier. It contains keratin, those dead cells, like I said before, which toughens those cells because they're basically dead. There are fat cells that are at the very base of your cutaneous membranes that are going to help cushion and absorb some of the impact when you do bump into something. There are pressure receptors in your skin that tell you that maybe you should remove yourself from a certain situation. It alerts your nervous system to tell you to get out of that particular situation. Like if you touch something hot, you immediately pull your hand away. If you didn't have those nerves to tell you to pull your hand away, you would cause more damage to your hand by leaving it on that hot stove or whatever it is, right? So that's why those nervous system receptors are there to tell you to move or to get yourself out of a dangerous situation. Okay, your skin also protects you from chemical damage, right? Acids and bases are chemicals that, if strong enough, if concentrated enough, can damage your cells if it comes into contact with you. Again, your skin is going to take the brunt of the damage if you spill a strong acid or a strong base on you, right? It's going to protect the underlying muscle. It's going to protect the underlying organs, right? If you if you had acid poured on your abdomen, for instance, in a lab accident, okay, your skin's going to take the brunt of that damage rather than your gastrointestinal tract taking the damage, right? Bacterial damage. Okay, your skin is the first line of defense against bacterial infection, viral infection, fungal infection. Okay, and most of the time, your skin, which is dead, like I said before, is able to protect you. Okay, you don't typically get bacterial infections on the surface of your skin. Where do you get them, right? You get them in your ear, you get them in your throat, you get them in your digestive tract. Okay, that's where you get infections. You typically don't get bacterial infections on the surface of your skin unless you have broken the epidermis and gotten into the dermis where there's a blood supply. Okay, the dermis is living tissue, there's blood supply there, and if bacteria get into that part of your integument, then you can get infected. But just the surface of your skin, if it's not broken, you don't get infections on the surface of unbroken skin. Okay, and that's because it's keratinized and dead, and it's hard for bacteria to propagate in that environment. Okay, your skin also protects you from ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Okay, it tries anyway. It doesn't always work, but it tries its best. Okay, to protect you from that ultraviolet light. It protects you from thermal or heat or cold damage. Okay, because there are receptors there that tell you when something's hot or cold. Okay, it protects you against something called desiccation, which is drying out. It helps keep you waterproof, but it also keeps you from losing water as well. Okay, it aids in body heat or body heat retention, or heat loss or heat retention. So when you are very hot, your skin will allow you to sweat, which will cool you down. But if you are in a cold environment, your skin will also help keep the heat that's inside you, and not let it dissipate out as quickly, so that your body stays at a proper temperature. It helps in excretion of urea and uric acid, which is going to be produced by your sweat glands, so you can actually get rid of waste through your skin. And it also helps vitamin D. Okay, that's really, really important because your skin has the ability to change chemicals in your body so that you can produce vitamin D, but only if you are exposed to sunlight. Okay, one thing about COVID-19 that we have learned through this pandemic is that many people that struggle with COVID-19 in the hospitals seem to be have one thing in common, and that one thing in common is that they are deficient in vitamin D. It seems that most people that do not do well have underlying health conditions. We've heard about diabetics having lots of issues, or people that had heart problems. We also see that people that are deficient in vitamin D do not do well with COVID-19 infection. So, when they tell you to stay inside and stay in the house and don't go outside, that's not necessarily a great idea, because you need sunlight. Okay, you need to be exposed to sunlight so that your body can produce vitamin D to help you. You can also take it as a supplement, right? You can stay in the house and take it as a supplement, but I think it's been shown that it's not as effective as actual sunlight and making it on your own. Okay, so something to chew on. Okay, let's talk about the structure of the skin. Okay, the epidermis is the outermost layer of skin, followed by the dermis, which is underneath, right? And we said already that the epidermis is made of the stratified squamous epithelium, and it's keratinized, and that the dermis is dense connective tissue. So over here, we have a microscope image of the epidermis and the dermis. So up here, this is all of the stratified squamous cells. Right here and in here are all stratified squamous cells. Okay, this is where everything above the blue line is epidermis, and everything below the blue line is dermis. Okay, so all of this is stratified squamous epithelium. Okay, and as you go from bottom to top, it becomes more and more dead, right? So more and more keratinized. So that's dead, and this is pretty much living down here, okay, in the dermis. But this is also alive, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. As it goes up, it becomes more and more keratinized, or more and more dead or protective. Now there are layers of the epidermis that I need you to know, and I need you to know the order of them because there is an order. Okay, but we'll go through that in a moment. Okay, underneath the dermis is what we call the hypodermis, okay, which is a subcutaneous layer. Sub meaning underneath, cutaneous meaning the skin, so it's underneath the skin. Okay, it's deep to the dermis. It's all the way at the bottom. Okay, we do not consider this to be a part of the skin. Okay, that's why it's called subcutaneous, underneath the skin, like a submarine, right, underneath water. Okay, subcutaneous is underneath the skin. We also call it, like I said, the hypodermis because it's below the dermis. Okay, if you've heard of a hypodermic needle, okay, a hypodermic needle has to penetrate the hypodermis in order for it to deliver the drug that it needs to deliver. Okay, this hypodermis is going to anchor the skin to your underlying organs. Most of the time, those underlying organs are going to be skeletal muscle, right? If you were to eat a chicken wing or cook a turkey for Thanksgiving, the skin is directly on top of the skeletal muscle of the bird. And the same thing for you. Your skin is directly attached to the muscles that lie underneath it. Okay, and this hypodermis is composed mostly of adipose tissue. So it is impossible to have 0% body fat, because in order for your skin to be attached to your body, to the rest of you, it needs hypodermis, which is made of adipose, right? So if you got rid of all the fat in your body, your skin would kind of sag on you, which we know is not the case, right? So, and the hypodermis is down here. And we can see that it has this yellow color, and I have a better picture later on, but it has these little yellow circles, and all those little yellow circles are adipose cells, or cells full of lipids, which are fats. And those are going to connect the skin or the integument to the muscles underneath. And if you've ever tried to peel the skin off of a bird that you haven't cooked yet, it's basically impossible to do, right? If you were to take a raw chicken wing and try to peel the skin off of the wing, it's impossible. But as soon as you cook it, that skin comes off real easy. And the reason for that is when you cook it for an hour or whatever it is, you melt all of these lipids, because lipids melt at a relatively low temperature compared to everything else. You're severing the connection between the skin and the muscle tissue underneath, and that skin just peels off, right? That's why it's so easy to peel a turkey when it comes out of the oven on Thanksgiving Day, which I'm a culprit of. Okay, so now we want to talk about the layers of the epidermis, and they are in a particular order. So you have to know what order they come in, and some of the layers have characteristics that we want to talk about more in depthly than other layers. So you're going to see that I talk about some layers more than others. Okay, so we're going to start with the deepest layer, and we're going to work our way towards the surface. Okay, so the deepest layer is called the stratum basale. Okay, stratum means a layer, right? Strata means layer. Basale means basement. So basement membrane, or the basement layer. It can also be called the stratum, or the layer, the germinativum. Okay, germ layer. Germ, whenever you see germ layer like that, it usually means like the origin, okay, the beginning of, the start of, okay? So this is going to be where the epidermis begins. This is where the cells of the epidermis originate, right, in the stratum germinativum or the stratum basale. Either answer is correct, but I need you to know both names. Okay, like I said, it's the deepest layer of that epidermis. It's the deepest layer of the epidermis. It lies next to the dermis, right? Directly underneath this is going to be the dermis. And I said before, as you go up towards the surface of the epidermis, they become more and more dead. Okay, so this is where the cells are most alive, right? This is where the epidermal cells are most living or the least keratinized, right? This is where mitosis happens. Mitosis is cell division. We talked about that in like chapter 1 or chapter 2 of this semester. Cell division is where new cells get produced, right? One cell divides up into two cells, and those two get divided into four, and so on and so forth, right? And the reason you do this is to replace cells that are dead or cells that have been damaged or lost due to some type of trauma, right? So in your skin, the outermost surface that touches your clothes or touches whatever you're touching, whatever, like your sheets, your clothes, if you touch other people or touch other things, those cells are constantly falling off of you. They're shedding off of your body. You take a shower, you wipe yourself with like a loofah sponge or a washcloth or a bar soap. Okay, you're essentially scraping off layers of skin cells. And if you didn't replace those skin cells, you would lose all of your skin, right? But you don't. You continuously have skin all the time, and that's because of the process of mitosis that is happening all the time in the stratum basale. Okay, as these cells get produced through this mitosis, they get pushed upwards into the more superficial layers, and as they get pushed upwards, they become more and more keratinized. Okay, they're very little keratinized in the stratum basale, but as they get pushed up into the next layers, the stratum spinosum and the stratum granulosum, they become more and more keratinized as they go up towards the surface. And once they get to the uppermost surface, they're fully keratinized and they're dead, right? We need them to be dead so that they can protect us. But they have to start out living, right? That just makes sense that they have to start out living. So on top of the stratum basale, we have the stratum spinosum. Okay, we're not going to talk much about that. It's not, doesn't have many characteristics that we want to discuss. On top of the stratum spinosum is the stratum granulosum. Okay, on top of that is what we call the stratum lucindum. Now this part, the stratum lucindum, is very special in the sense that it's not in all areas of your body. Okay, it's not in all areas. We only see stratum lucidum on the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. Right? If you take a look at these two areas of the body, they look very different than the rest of you. They feel very different than the rest of you. They can take much more abuse than the skin on the rest of your body. They have calluses. They're tougher. They're thicker. Okay, they're rougher. And the reason for that is those are the parts of your skin that are constantly in contact with something. And you have to remember, we are a species that has evolved to wear clothes and to wear protective coverings, right? We didn't always wear shoes as a species. We didn't always put gloves on to protect ourselves. We were a species that were hunters and gatherers, and we had to be in the wild, and we would walk on terrain that was not, very comfortable or posh. Okay, we would walk all over rocks and sand and dirt and, all types of uncomfortable types of terrain. And we would have to hunt things and make things with our hands and catch things and do and climb things. And our hands and feet had to be tough, or else if they weren't, okay, we would be kind of useless, right? If we had, if we had skin that wasn't very tough on our feet and it would cut easily and bruise easily, we wouldn't be able to walk around as a species, and we would be the things that got eaten first because we couldn't run around because our feet hurt, right? So through evolution, we've had this layer of skin, show up in our genetics in places that is going to be beneficial for us, right? So we only find this lucindum layer on the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet for protection because those areas come into contact with things that are much more difficult for the skin to handle. If we're not talking about the palms of the hands or the soles of the feet, okay, then the next layer is going above the granulosum is going to be the stratum corneum. Okay, and this is the outermost layer of your epidermis. Okay, this is the stuff that's like covers 99% of your body. That isn't the palms of your hand or soles of your feet. Okay, these are layered like shingles. Okay, shingles are always, you don't layer shingles, you don't butt them up against each other like that. Okay, you will always take a shingle and then put the next shingle over half, and you'll always layer them like that. Okay, so that water can't get underneath the shingles. Okay, that's when you do a roof and you want to protect your roof, you don't butt them up like this because water can find that seam and get in between them. So you layer them on top of one another. Okay, so our skin cells are layered like these shingles, and they're filled with keratin, and that is to help protect us even more from things like water loss or heat loss and things like that. Okay, so here is a picture of the different layers. Now here, this is the most superficial, right? This is the most superficial. This is the most deep, right? And we know that because the dermis is down here. And here are the layers from superficial to deep, right? Corneum, lucindum, if we're talking about, the hands and feet, the granulosum, the spinosum, the basale, and then the dermis. Over here, it's the same layers. It's just this particular list is going from deep to superficial. So don't get confused there. Okay, so corneum is still superficial, right? Corneum. Okay, lucindum, granulosum, spinosum, basale. Okay, there just happen to be one's going from deep to super, one's going from super to deep. Okay, on the test that you take, it's guaranteed that I'm going to ask you to put these in the proper order. So please make sure you know the proper order. Okay, melanin. Okay, melanin is the chemical or the pigment that is produced by what we call melanocytes. Anytime you see CYTE, okay, cyte, that means cell. Okay, in this case, it's a cell that produces melanin. Okay, if you see osteocyte, it's a bone cell. If you see hepatocyte, it's a liver cell. If you see leukocyte, it's a white blood cell. Erythrocyte, red blood cell. Anytime you see cyte, it means a type of cell. Okay, in this case, it's a cell that produces melanin. Okay, melanin is a pigment. Okay, it's melanocytes are mostly found in that stratum basale, that germ layer, that basement layer. Okay, the color of melanin is going to vary. Okay, from different yellows to browns to blacks. Okay, the amount of melanin produced depends on your genetics and your exposure to sunlight. So you are born with a certain amount of melanin. You do not gain and you do not lose melanin. You can alter the color of your melanin if you tan, but that melanin will always that color change is a reaction to protect you against ultraviolet light. Okay, once you are not exposed to that ultraviolet light any longer, that melanin returns to its original color, right? Okay, we'll talk more about that in a moment. Okay, the dermis. Okay, the dermis, which is underneath our epidermis, is going to be or have two layers. Okay, and we can see those two layers here. Okay, underneath the blue line is the dermis. Above the blue line is the epidermis. Okay, and the part of the dermis that comes into contact with the epidermis is called the papillary dermis. And then the bottom of the dermis, which comes into contact with the hypodermis, is called the reticular dermis. Okay, now the reason that they have different names is because we have things called dermal papillae, which are these little bumps that are little extensions of the dermis that extend into the epidermis. The reason for this is so that we can have a much stronger connection between the epidermis and the dermis, right? We have more surface area. If this was just a straight line and that dermis and epidermis connected at this straight line, there would be a good connection, but you get more connection if you create these little folds called dermal papillae. Okay, dermal papillae. Okay, that's going to cause more surface area. Okay, they're going to contain capillaries or capillary loops in there. They're also going to have certain pain receptors and touch receptors that are going to be in the papillary dermis. Now, the nerves and receptors that are in the papillary dermis are going to respond to stimuli that are different than the nerves that are found in the reticular dermis. Okay, if you touch your hand lightly, if you take your fingers and touch your arm lightly, these receptors get stimulated. When you add more pressure and you push down on your arm, right, that pressure is going to touch these receptors, and that's going to tell your brain completely different story, right? If you have light touch, this receptor is going to tell your brain something is touching you very lightly and gently. And if you add enough pressure to touch this nerve is going to tell your brain, whoa, something's really grabbing us hard and we might be in trouble and we have to do something about the situation, right? So different sensations for different amounts of pressure. And that's why we have different levels of these nerves in different parts of our skin, right? The higher up, the less pressure is needed. The lower down, the more pressure is needed to activate or stimulate these particular nerves. Okay, the reticular layer, which is the deepest of the layers of all the skin. Okay, we're going to have our blood vessels there. Our sweat and oil glands are going to originate there. Okay, the sweat and oil glands originate here. They do go up to the surface, but they originate down there in the reticular layer. And again, the deep pressure receptors are going to be found there. Okay, the dermis is composed mostly of something called collagen. Okay, collagen is found throughout the dermis. It gives the skin its tough nature. Okay, as you get older, your collagen breaks down and you start to get wrinkles and bags under your eyes and things start to sag. When you're young, your collagen is young and it's nice and tough and elastic and gives your skin a nice tone. Okay, the blood vessels that are found in your dermis play a role in your body temperature regulation. When they circulate blood, that produces heat, and that heat is going to help keep your body temperature. Now, this model here, this diagram, is very important. Whoops. We need to know this for the exam, 100%, and we need to know everything on it. Okay, we're going to need to know the major layers, right? We have our epidermis, dermis, hypodermis. Those are our three major layers. So here's our epidermis, here's our dermis, and our hypodermis. Okay. We can see the papillary layer here, which is where that dermal papillary area is going to extend itself into the epidermis all around. And we can see the bumps here, which are our dermal papillae. Okay. We have our dermis in the center. We can see how much of this entire diagram is dermis, right? The majority of this is going to be dermis, very little portions of epidermis, very little portions of hypodermis. Okay. Here is our subcutaneous tissue, the fat there, the adipose tissue, subcutaneous fat at the bottom there. Okay. Let's go over here. Okay, we have a hair shaft. The hair shaft is going to be the part of the hair that extends outside of the epidermis. Okay, so any hair that you physically see is going to be epidermis. It's going to be the hair shaft, rather. Okay. You have holes in your skin right here, okay, that are called pores. And those little pores are going to be exits out of the skin from some type of gland underneath. Okay, most likely a sweat gland. Okay. Then we have what we call the erector pillae muscles. Okay, and this here is an erector pillae muscle. And this erector pillae muscle, you'll notice that it's attached to a hair follicle, right? This here, this thing here, this is called a hair follicle, right? Hair follicle. And every hair follicle is going to have a erector pillae muscle, and that erector pillae muscle is going to help to move the hair around, right? If you ever get cold and your hair stands up on edge, or if you get scared and you get goosebumps, the thing that's causing those goosebumps is the erector pillae muscle that's attached to that particular hair follicle. And the hair, what's the hair follicle? That's where the hair grows out of. Okay, so this whole thing is the hair follicle. Attached to every hair follicle is what we call a sebaceous gland. A sebaceous gland produces oil, and you can see it here. Okay, this gland is on every hair follicle. We have one of those on every one, right? So here's another hair follicle. Here's the gland that is the sebaceous gland that's attached to it. Okay, every single hair follicle you have is going to have an oil gland. And that oil gland is going to produce oil that coats and makes the hair kind of like semi-waterproof, right? If you wet paper, the paper falls apart, right? You wouldn't want that happening to your hair. You want your hair to stay nice and strong. So the oil that is put onto the surface of the hair is going to help make your hair waterproof. And you don't want to lose the hair, right? The hair is important to keep heat in, right? You have hair on your body in order to keep heat in your body and to help regulate your body temperature. Okay. Here we have a sweat gland. Okay, it's a squiggly purple thing, and that purple thing goes up and extends out to that pore. You can see another one over here. Okay, this is a sweat gland, and it extends up and goes out and it exits through that pore. Okay, this is called an eccrine sweat gland. Okay, and we'll talk about different types of sweat glands a little bit later, but this sweat gland is going to produce sweat that falls or gets excreted onto the surface of the skin. Okay. Again, there's the hair follicle. At the very base of the hair follicle is what we call the root of the hair. So this area down here is called the root of the hair. Okay, whenever you get hair waxed or threaded or tweezed, what you're doing is you're ripping the hair shaft out of the follicle at the root, right? This whole piece of hair that extends through the epidermis and dermis and down to the root is going to get ripped from the root. And that's why it takes longer for that hair to grow back than if you just cut it at the surface. Okay, if you were just to cut the hair at the surface, right, and you just get a haircut and shave it, right, shave that hair there, that hair, the rest of the hair that you didn't shave off is directly underneath the epidermis. And in a couple days or a couple hours, depending on you, that hair can extend itself over the epidermis again. However, if you tear it out with wax or with a threading thing or with a tweezer, you're ripping it out all the way from down here, and that whole hair shaft has to regrow, and it's going to take longer for it to grow back, which is precisely why you do it, right? You do those types of things so that the hair can take longer, so you don't have to deal with it. At the very base of that root, you see that there are little blood vessels going in and out of that hair follicle. Those blood vessels are going to be feeding the follicle nutrients from the bloodstream so that you can continuously grow hair from that hair follicle. If you were to damage, or if these blood vessels don't work anymore, this follicle will not longer produce hair. And that's how people go bald, right? People go bald because the blood flow to these hair follicles dies, and therefore it can't grow any hair. So that's what those medications do. That's what Rogaine is formulated to do. It's supposed to, get the blood flow back to that follicle. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. All depends on the person, I guess, and your genetics. Some people just weren't meant for hair, and some people were meant to be bald, I guess, depending on their genetics that they inherited from their parents and their grandparents. Okay, here is our adipose tissue or fat tissue. Here are our blood vessels. Okay, and over here, so let me move this out of the way so we can see it. Okay, we have our different nervous structures. We have our Meissner's corpuscle, and we have our Pacinian corpuscle. Okay, these are the two that I want you to know. You don't have to know the last two. That's the only two things you don't have to know. Okay, you need to know Meissner, you need to know Pacinian. Okay, the other two don't worry about. Okay, a Meissner's corpuscle is this tiny little corpuscle up here that deals with what? Soft touch, right? If you lightly touch the surface of the skin, this little sensor will be stimulated and tell your brain something's touching you lightly. Down here, this Pacinian corpuscle, this big one down here, kind of looks like an onion, and you can see another one over here. Okay, these are deep touch sensors, right? So you have to add a lot more pressure down onto the skin in order for this sensor to be stimulated. And when that is stimulated, depending on what's going on in the situation, if someone's mad at you and they punch you, this will get alerted rather than this one, and it'll tell your brain that something's wrong, right? So make sure you know all those structures, what they do, and be able to identify those for the test. Okay, like I said, we were going to talk about melanin again. Here we go. So these are different types of things that help determine the skin tone of an individual. Okay, melanin is the main one, right? The more melanin you have, the darker your skin tone is going to be. Okay, but that's not the only pigment that's found in our skin. We also have carotenes. Okay, carotenes are things that make things have a yellowish or an orange color. Okay, that's why carrots are orange, because they have lots of carotene in them. Okay, hemoglobin isn't necessarily a pigment, but it does contribute to your skin tone. Hemoglobin, when it comes into contact with oxygen, turns red, and when it's flowing through your bloodstream and you have blood vessels that are close to the surface or in your skin, okay, it's going to cause a reddish or pinkish hue to your skin. So it's gonna make your skin a little bit more pinkish. That's why when you're sick and like your blood pressure drops a little bit and you look pale, that is due to hemoglobin not being in that particular area, right? And the oxygen content in your bloodstream is going to determine how red your skin gets in those particular areas. Okay, some appendages of the skin. We have sebaceous glands and sweat glands. We spoke about those a little bit. Sebaceous will be the oil glands. Sweat glands will be for sweat, but you also have hair follicles, and nails. Okay, these are all appendages of the skin. Okay, sebaceous glands produce oil. Like I said before, they're going to lubricate the skin. They're going to help prevent your hair from becoming brittle, but they're also going to kill bacteria. Okay, that's one thing I didn't mention before. The oil that's produced and put onto your hair follicles, your hair shafts, are going to help kill bacteria on the surface of your body. Okay, the oils are going to kind of trap the bacteria so that they can't really move and get into any open cracks or open spaces. And it's going to change the pH of your surface of your skin. And, bacteria don't like certain pHs. They like to live in certain types of pHs, and the oil will change it such that the bacteria can't live so good. Okay, most of these sebaceous glands will have ducts that empty out onto hair follicles, and these are activated at puberty. Okay, that's why young kids don't really stink so much, because their glands aren't necessarily producing these oils yet. Okay, here is a microscopic image here's our hair shaft or hair follicle. Here's the sebaceous gland next to it. Okay, so that's exactly what you're seeing here, but on an actual microscope slide. Okay, sweat glands. Okay, like I said before, they produce sweat. They're widely distributed over the entire surface of your body. And you have two types, like I said before. You have eccrine, which is going to open to a pore on the surface of the skin. Okay, and that's what we saw in the model. But then you also have an apocrine sweat gland, which is going to empty out onto a hair follicle, much like a sebaceous gland, but it's not going to produce oil. It's going to produce sweat. Okay, sweat is going to be made of different things, which we'll talk about in a minute after I get by this slide. So what you're looking at here is you're looking at a sweat gland, an eccrine sweat gland, and basically it's kind of like looking down through a straw, right? So if you were to cut a straw, or even just take a straw and look down the hole, that's what you're looking at here. Okay, it's basically tubes. Okay, so those glands, the cells of those glands form these tubes that you can see in the center of. It's kind of like a straw, like I just said. Okay, so what is your sweat made of? Okay, mostly water, right? That's what your skin is mostly made of, water. But you do definitely have salts in your sweat. You can easily taste that if you sweat and it gets into your mouth, or if it gets into your eyes. Okay, it burns. If you get into an open cut, it kind of burns. Okay, there are some things that get excreted from you in your sweat. Okay, vitamin C is one of those. If you don't absorb all the vitamin C that you've taken in throughout the day, can be excreted through your sweat and your urine. There's some metabolic wastes that can be excreted through your sweat: fatty acids, proteins. What's it do? What's the function of it? Okay, it helps to dissipate excess heat, right? If you're hot, you begin to sweat. Okay, and that sweat's supposed to cool you down. Okay, it excretes waste, like I said before. Again, it lowers the acidic nature, much like the oil that we talked about. Okay, I think that sweat is going to do that a lot more than the oil gland. Okay, so your sweat glands are going to reduce the pH of your skin so that bacteria can't grow on it. Okay, and the odor that people get from sweating is associated with the bacteria that's on your skin. Okay, the flora that's on your skin in combination with the sweat. The sweat itself doesn't have an odor. It's the combination of that sweat and the bacteria on your skin that's going to give you a body odor. Okay, here is a hair follicle diagram. I do not need you to memorize anything about this particular picture. I just wanted to show it to you to give you a little bit more understanding. Okay, that a hair follicle is not just one thing. It's a complex piece of anatomy. Okay, hair is produced by a hair follicle. Again, we have keratinized cells in your hair. I said earlier on that you find keratin in your hair, in your nails, and in your skin. Okay, and you also have melanin that gives you that is responsible for your hair color, just like melanin was responsible for your skin color. Okay. Here is just an electron microscope image of a piece of hair. Okay, it looks pretty nasty, but this is what it looks like, at 1,000,000 times its normal size. Okay, your nails, okay, which are another appendage of your skin, are scale-like modifications. They are very, very heavily keratinized. That's what makes them so strong. Okay, the stratum basale, or that basement membrane, extends beneath the nail bed, and that's where the growth of the nail is going to come from. And they do not have any pigments. Your nails are actually clear. Oops, let me go back one. Spoiler alert, there's an ugly foot on the next slide. Your nails are pigmentless, right? They don't have any pigments. It makes them colorless. And what you see, it looks like your nails are pink, but you're actually looking through your nails to the underlying tissue on your fingers, and that's what gives it that pinkish color. Okay, now we can start talking about some imbalances of the skin, aka infections, right? So there are some things, like I said, I've been saying a lot that your skin is the first line of defense. It protects you. Things can't grow in dead cells. That is true, but there are always exceptions to the rule, right? And there are some bacteria and there are some fungus that are, flesh eating, and that they love eating your or reproducing on your epidermis. One example is athlete's foot, which is also called tinea pedis. Okay, anytime you see ped or pod, it usually refers to a foot. Like a pedal is where you put your foot on a bike. You get a pedicure, right? You go to a podiatrist, right? You have a tripod. All these things refer to feet or foot of some kind. Okay, an athlete's foot is a fungal infection that's going to eat away at the skin on your feet. This is why you should not let your feet get wet or continuously wear wet socks or wet shoes. Over time, fungus can grow, and this could happen to your foot, and it's extremely painful. It's hard to get rid of. It's just not fun. You can also get boils or carbuncles on your skin, which can be caused by bacterial infection. You can get cold sores caused by viruses like herpes virus. All right, we don't want that. Okay, here are a whole bunch of infections or allergy reactions that your skin can have. Okay, contact dermatitis is when you touch something, right? Contact means that you touch something. Derma refers to the epidermis or the dermis, and itis always means inflammation, right? So if you have appendicitis, right, that's inflammation of the appendix. Bronchitis, inflammation of the bronchioles. Okay, dermatitis is the inflammation of the skin, and that's what we see here when we look at these raised bumps or blisters or scales, something like that. Okay, so contact dermatitis would be something that you get from like poison ivy, for instance. Right? It's an allergic reaction to a chemical. Impetigo, okay, that's caused by a bacterial infection. We can see the scaling and the redness of this individual's skin. Psoriasis is a very, very common skin condition that people have. You see commercials for it all the time. It could be triggered by trauma. It could be triggered by infection or stress. And it kind of comes and goes on the patient, and it shows up with this like red flaky skin, and it could be irritating and uncomfortable. And they can have outbreaks of these. It's not always like that on an individual, but during times of stress, it could become activated. Okay, and it's just unpleasant for the individual. Okay, let's talk about burns now. Okay, which is again is another way that you can shock the skin or put the skin into some type of imbalance. Okay, a burn is tissue damage and cell death caused by heat, electricity, ultraviolet light radiation, or chemicals. Right, so all of these things can burn you. A lot of times you only think of hot or heat burning you, but electricity produces heat, right? If you get electrical burns, or if you get sunburns, or if you get burned by a chemical, all these things create burns. And why are burns so dangerous? Burns are dangerous because they lead to dehydration, electrolyte imbalances, and both of these things could put you into circulatory shock or give you a heart attack or cardiac arrest. Right, and that's the big danger. So there are 3 types of burns. We have first-degree burns, which I'm sure almost everyone has gotten in their lifetime. We have second-degree burns, which a lot of people have in their lifetime. And then we have third-degree burns, which not a lot of people experience, thankfully. But a first-degree burn is when only your epidermis is damaged and it turns red and is irritated and swollen. Okay, that's a typical sunburn is a first-degree burn. Okay, but you can also get a second-degree burn from sunburn. Okay, if it's really, really bad. And the second you see a blister, that is considered to be a second-degree burn. Okay, so if you go into the sun and you just have red skin, okay, you don't have a second-degree burn. If you go into the sun and you go home from the beach and you have blisters, you have a second-degree burn. Most of the time, second-degree burns come from some type of heat source, right? I've gotten second-degrry burns putting my arm into like a fire pit, or trying to get something out of the toaster oven and you touch a hot piece of metal, something like that, where a blister forms, right? That's a second-degree burn. Third-degree burns are when you actually char the skin that comes into contact with whatever it is that's burning you, right? The skin actually chars, like if you're cooking steak, or if you're cooking, food, and some of the skin or some of a portion of that meat or something turns black because of the intense heat. That's considered a third-degree burn. Okay, and all of your skin layers are destroyed, all of your epidermis, all of your dermis, and you are down to either the meat underneath, the skeletal muscle underneath, or even worse. Okay, if you go to a hospital because of a burn, they're going to try to evaluate you and put you into the right part of the hospital for certain care. There is something called the critical burn unit. Okay, and if you are placed in the critical burn unit if 25% of your body is covered in second-degree burns, or if 10% of your body is covered in third-degree burns, or if you have any type of third-degree burn on the face, hands, or feet, you are then considered to be critical, and you go into the critical burn unit. Okay, one common way to treat burns like that, especially third-degree burns, is through skin grafts, where they actually peel healthy skin off of one part of you and place it on top of the affected burned area, hoping that your body heals itself with that new skin. It's almost like they make bandages out of your own skin. Okay, they'll shave skin off. Let's say you burned your leg, right? Let's go back a picture and talk about this person's leg. See if I can go back a picture. There we go. Okay, so this individual obviously has very badly burned legs. But this person on the abdomen or the back maybe didn't get any burns on their abdomen or their back. So they'll take basically a razor, essentially, and they'll shave a very thin layer of skin off of your abdomen, and they'll place that skin onto the affected areas, and they'll staple them around the edges onto the infected areas, hoping that skin flap that they just put on heals over the burn, right? And they'll do that for all the third-degree burns. But then now you have a wound on your abdomen that was caused by them taking the skin off of it, right? So now you have to do double duty healing, but still to save the skin and to not put you into dehydration and cardiac arrest, it's worth it. Okay, quickly talk about cancer briefly. Cancer is an abnormal cell mass or a tumor, right? That's what we call a tumor, an abnormal cell mass. It's cells that cannot stop dividing, right? That's all cancer is, and all cancers are the same. It's just cells that cannot stop dividing. They divide and divide and divide and divide without any regulation. You can get them in any tissue in the body, okay? And your skin is no different. So there are two types of ways to classify any cancer. You have the benign type and the malignant type. The only difference between the two is that one moves around or spreads and one does not. Okay, benign tumors or benign cancer cells do not spread. Okay, it's very easy for a doctor, or it's easier for a doctor to treat a tumor that he or she knows is going to stay in one spot, right? If you have a benign tumor in your abdomen, the doctor knows that that tumor is not going to move from your abdomen, and therefore they can treat you differently than if you had a malignant tumor. A malignant tumor is one that moves around, and we call that movement metastasizing. Okay, so for instance, I had an aunt who passed away who was diagnosed with lung cancer, and that lung cancer moved to her bones and to her brain and to her pancreas. Okay, and it's very hard for a doctor to treat someone when they don't know where the cancer is going to go next, right? They can treat you for lung cancer and get rid of the lung cancer, but they won't know that the cancer moved somewhere else until you show symptoms, which might take weeks or months. Okay, so it's much harder to determine or to treat malignant tumors than it is benign tumors. That doesn't mean benign tumors can't be deadly. They can. You can get a tumor that grows in a very bad spot, right? If there was a tumor growing on your aorta and they couldn't operate, or if it was growing in the middle of your brain and they couldn't operate on it, okay, those could be deadly, but they are much less likely to be deadly than a malignant tumor. Okay. I'm going to go through some skin types or skin cancer types. You do not have to memorize these. I'm not going to ask you about individual types of skin cancers. I just want to bring it up to you. Okay, basal cell carcinoma. This is one that's the least malignant. It's very rare that it travels around. It is the most common type of skin cancer, however. It arises from the stratum basale. Okay. We have squamosal cell carcinoma. Okay, this one can be very dangerous because it moves into the lymph nodes. And once cancer moves into the lymph nodes, you are considered to be in stage 3 or 4 cancer because that's how it travels around to different organ systems. Okay, like when my aunt had lung cancer that moved to her bones, it moved to her bones through her lymphatic system. However, early detection or an early removal really enhances your chances of being cured of this disease. Now, the reason some of the more deadly cancers we have in the world are skin cancers, but not a lot of people die of skin cancers. The reason for that is that you can see the abnormality before it gets really bad, right? It's on the surface of your skin. And if you can't see it, a spouse can see it, a loved one can see it, a family member can see it, a friend can see it and tell you, hey, listen, there's something on your back that looks kind of funky, or you should get that looked at. If you have a tumor growing in your lung, no one can see it. And you're not going to even know it's there until it's of a certain size where it's giving you a symptom. And that might take 5 years before that tumor to get large enough for you to even know it's there. Where, skin cancer, you're going to notice that almost right away, right? Because something doesn't look right and it's on your skin that you can see every day in the mirror. Okay. Malignant melanoma. Okay, this is the most deadly of all the skin cancers, and that's the cancer that affects the cells that make melanin, called melanocytes. It metastasizes very rapidly, so you have to get this taken care of as soon as possible. And if you have a mole or a birthmark or a beauty mark, or however you want to call it, those are a lot of times in danger of becoming melanomas. So what doctors do when they give you checkups, they use the ABCD rule, and those letters stand for asymmetry, border irregularity, color, and diameter. And if any of those letters there, any of these characteristics of the mole present themselves, then the doctor might require you to remove or suggest that you remove the tumor or the beauty mark or the birthmark before it becomes a problem for you. Okay, now the last two slides here are the special senses. So we are done with the skin for now in the integumentary system. Okay, the last two things we want to talk about are the special senses. And normally I would put this into the nervous system, but the syllabus has it here, which is fine, doesn't matter. But the only two special senses we're going to discuss are the eye and the ear. Now, I have two, like I said, I have two diagrams. This is the eye, and the next one is the ear. And you basically have to know whatever it is that I'm going to circle, right, on these diagrams, and you have to know the functions of those particular structures. Okay, so let's get going on the eye. Right, so the eye is a sense organ. Okay, it's supposed to give you sensory inputs, and the way that your eyes do that is by taking light. Okay, there's light energy in the form of waves, and that light energy has to go through your eye and hit the back of the eye, this like orange lining of the back of the eye. And the light that hits this back of the eye is then taken in by the optic nerve and then sent to your brain, right? So that's a stimulus. The light that goes through your eye, hits the back of the eye, is a stimulus. That information is taken to the central nervous system where integration occurs, right? In the brain, the integration happens, and then the brain decides what to do with that information. Sometimes nothing is required. Sometimes action is required by an effector, like your skeletal muscles or your glands or something like that. But the whole point of having eyes is to capture light, right? That's the whole point of this, is to capture light and take that light and give it to your brain so that your brain can figure out what to do. If there's no light, if you are absent of light, you don't see anything, right? If you are in pitch blackness and your eyes are open, you don't see anything because there's no light, right? Your vision is dependent on how much light is in the room or in the area that you're in, okay? So with that said, let's talk about how the eye actually does that. So there are two chambers of the eye, okay? There are two chambers. There's an anterior chamber and there's a posterior chamber, okay? The anterior chamber is much smaller than the posterior chamber, but the anterior chamber and posterior chamber are both full of liquids. Okay, the liquid in the front of the eye, the anterior part of the eye, is called aqueous humor. Aqueous humor is very watery. Okay, so if you were to cut into an eyeball, okay, that eyeball would leak what looks like water. Okay. If you were to cut into the back portion or the posterior chamber of the eye, you would see like a clear jelly. Okay, so just imagine Jello, but clear, no color. Okay, and the reason that we have these liquids in the front and the back of the eye is to keep what we call internal pressure. Okay, it's going to keep the shape of the eye. Okay, if you have a water balloon and you take the water out of the balloon, okay, the balloon deflates. Right? The only thing that was keeping the balloon expanded was the water that was inside of it. Okay, so that's what's going on with this eyeball. Okay, same thing. So those are the two chambers. Now let's talk about what the chambers are made of, right? So let's start on the outside of the eye and work our way in. So the white part of your eye, which would be this area, which is all over here, right? You're looking at a lateral view of the eye here, and you're looking at an anterior view of the eye here. So this is anterior, this is lateral, right? So the white parts of your eye are called the sclera. Okay, the sclera. The very front of the sclera, okay, this part of the sclera here is a clear dome. And that clear dome is where you would put a contact on, right? If you wear contacts, you place that contact directly over this clear dome, which is called your cornea. Okay, you can get scratches on your cornea, and those scratches can be very irritable. They can hurt. They usually heal on their own. Okay, but you can damage the corneas. Okay, so we did that. We did anterior chamber. Okay, here is the anterior chamber. Okay, between that cornea and this circular colored portion of the eye. Okay, that would be this area here. Okay, and that colored portion of the eye, okay, is called the iris. Okay, this colored portion of the eye is called the iris. The hole in the middle of the iris, which is black, okay, that is called the pupil. Okay, that hole in the middle is called the pupil. Okay, here it is, pupil. Okay, now your pupils can dilate, okay, which means they can get bigger and smaller. Now, if you were in class with me in the room, what I would do now is I would ask you to look into the eyes of the person next to you, and I would shut the lights, and then I would turn them on, and you would see that the pupils get bigger and smaller, all depending upon how much light is in the room, right? So that's exactly what the pupil does. It filters how much light can get into the eye. If you're in a room that's really, really bright, okay, and there's tons of light in the room, you don't want to overstimulate the eye and overstimulate the brain. So what happens is this pupil gets smaller if there's a lot of light in the room, okay, and it lessens how much light can get in. If you're in a really dark room, or if you're outside at nighttime, your pupils get as big as possible to let as much light into the back of your eye as possible. Okay, so that's why our pupils dilate. Okay, when you are on certain drugs, or if you've been drinking alcohol, or if you have head trauma, your pupils might not dilate properly, right? If you have a concussion, your pupils might not dilate properly because your brain is not functioning right. But also, if you're on drugs, or if you're under the influence of alcohol, your pupils won't necessarily dilate properly when bright lights are shined into them, right? Normally, if you have a bright light shined into your eyes, your pupils get really, really tiny. Certain drugs that you could take, hallucinogenic drugs and things like that, can reduce the reaction of your pupils to bright lights. This is why police officers, the first thing they do when they pull you over is shine a bright light into your face, because they want to see if your pupils are dilating, because that's a telltale sign that you might be under the influence of some type of drug. Okay. Behind the pupil is this very large biconcave, which means it has two concave sides, lens. Okay, and that lens is there to help to refract the light to the back of the eye, right? If we just had light going straight back like this, it would only hit this one area. We don't want that. We want the light to go in all directions so that all of the cells in the back of the eye can get light. And that's what this lens does. So the light comes in, and then it causes that light to go in all different directions towards the back of the eye. The more light that hits the back of the eye, okay, or the more surface of the back of the eye that gets hit, the better vision you will have. Okay. This lens is held in place by what we call ciliary bodies and ciliary muscles and suspensory ligaments. Okay, here is the muscles here, here, and here, and the ligaments are holding that lens in place. Okay, so the muscles are here and the ligaments are there. Okay, we don't need to know that. Okay. In the corner of your eye, like closest to your nose, you have a tear duct that's called the lacrimal gland. Okay, and that's where like pink eye would get infected. Okay, that's where the bacteria that causes pink eye, or the virus that causes pink eye, would infect your eye at that lacrimal duct, or that lacrimal gland, or your tear duct. Okay. Okay, we did the sclera. Okay, now the back of the eye, which is where all the light has to go. Okay, that is called the retina. Okay, so this entire surface of the posterior chamber is called the retina. Okay, And the retina contains what we call rods and cones. Rods and cones. And rods and cones are what give you your ability to see colors. And it also gives you what we call depth perception. Okay, depth perception, which means you can tell one thing is closer to you than another thing because your eyes are letting you know that, right? If I look into the classroom and I see someone in the first row, I know that they are closer to me than someone in the last row because I have rods and cones. Okay. The choroid is, what's happening? The choroid is going to be a layer of your eye that lies between the retina and the sclera. So this is the choroid right here. And that choroid is going to have where all of your blood vessels for your eye originate. Okay, so the blood vessels are actually underneath the sclera, but when those blood vessels become irritated, they can show through the sclera. So when you have bloodshot eyes, because of maybe allergies or maybe because you're under the influence of something, those blood vessels can show up because they're getting swollen underneath the sclera, but they can show through the sclera. Okay. Here we have the optic nerve. Okay, that is going to be where the retina, so the retina is going to line the entire interior portion of the eye, and then it's going to come together and become the optic nerve. And that optic nerve is going to go directly to the brain and the central nervous system. Okay. Okay, that's what I want you to know about the eye. Okay, the next thing and the last thing that we're going to talk about is the ear. Okay, here's a model of the ear. Now, there's lots of things on the outside here of the eye, of the ear that I don't necessarily want you to know. Okay, the outer ear. Okay, this part of the ear here that you get pierced. This is, very. You cover it with a hat or earmuffs or something like that. That part's called the pinna. Okay, or it's called the auricle. Okay, that's what we're going to refer to it as. Okay, the auricle lobe or the auricular lobe is called, that's what your earlobe is, but this whole thing could be called the auricle or it could be called the pinna. Either one is fine with me. I just need you to know both. Don't worry about all of the different folds of the pinna. I'm not concerned with that. Okay, I just want you to know what that structure is called. So now we can take the ear and break it up into three major sections. So here are the three major sections that we have. We have the outer ear, we have the middle ear, and we have the inner ear. Okay, so we'll work our way from outer to inner. Okay, but again, what's the point of having an ear? This is the sense organ, right? So the eye took in light waves and gave those light waves to your brain. Your ear is going to work similarly, but it's going to be sound waves. Okay, and the sound waves are going to go into the ear and get taken by your cochlear nerve and your vestibular nerve and given to your brain. Okay, it's for integration. It's the same thing. It's just information in different forms, right? There was light information that gave you one sense, and now there's sound information that's giving you another sense. But it's the same goal. It's trying to take information and give it to your brain, right? So this pinna, or this auricle, has a function, and this is part of the outer ear. And the function of this is to act like a funnel, right? That's what it's trying to do. Okay, all it is a big funnel, and it's trying to take in as much sound as possible. If you didn't have the pinna, right, if you took this off, right, make believe that's not there, okay, and this was the only opening you had, you wouldn't get as much sound waves into your head as you do with the pinna. The pinna is going to allow for much more waves of sound to enter into the inner ear or the middle ear so that your brain can get that information. Okay, so that we need that. If you just fold it up, if you just put your hands onto your auricle and you fold your auricle in different ways, or you cup your hand over your ear, you hear differently, right? So this does make a difference in your hearing. If you damage the pinna or the auricle, your hearing will be altered. It might not be terrible, but it definitely is not the same as if you have a full intact auricle. Okay, that auricle is going to go into this ear canal, which is called the external acoustic meatus. We saw this on the skeletal system when we did the skull. We saw the external acoustic meatus, and that's the ear canal that leads into what we call the middle ear. So that's going to be the end of our outer ear, right? The auricle and the external acoustic meatus. Now, this acoustic meatus is lined with little tiny hairs, and those little hairs are going to help produce the wax that's built up in your ear. And we need that wax. That wax is there for a reason. It's there to catch particles and stuff so that it doesn't get into your ear. Those hairs that you have there, okay, those hairs are going to be a big part of your sense of hearing. If you've ever had ringing in the ears after being at a concert or a club with very loud music for a long time, and you come out of the club or the concert and you have ringing in your ears, it's because these hairs have been caused to lay down, right? Normally they stand up nice and straight, but then they'll lay down because of the sound waves beating on them. And that ringing is due to the fact that your body is trying to react to these hairs not working properly. Okay. So if you expose yourself to loud sounds over a long period of time, say you're a musician and you don't wear ear protection. Let's say you work in an airport and you're around very loud planes. Let's say you're a soldier and you're exposed to loud explosions and things like that. This can have long-term effects, and you might have ringing in your ears for a very long time. And that's called tinnitus. Okay, tinnitus is when you have a constant ringing in your ears due to those due to these hairs inside your inner ear, middle ear, being damaged. Okay, and I can't imagine ringing in your ears for 10 minutes after you get out of a concert is annoying. I can imagine how horrible it might be if you had to live with it for the rest of your life. Okay, then we get to the middle ear, and that's where we find a lot of goodies. Okay, and one of the goodies is this little piece here. It's called a tympanic membrane, okay, or AKA your eardrum. And the tympanic membrane is a very thin membrane that when it gets hit with sound waves, it vibrates. Okay, this little eardrum vibrates, and that's why it's called a drum. It works just like a real drum. When you when you hit a drum with a stick, the thing that you're hitting is called a skin, and that skin vibrates, and it vibrates the air in the drum, and that gives you a sound, right? Same thing kind of happens here. So this thing is going to vibrate when the sound wave hits it, and those vibrations are going to be transferred into these bones, which are in the middle ear. And those bone vibrations are going to then be given to another piece, which then takes that information to the brain. Okay, so let's talk about the bones for a minute, because that's also part of our middle ear. So we have our tympanic membrane here, okay, that separates our outer ear from our middle ear. And then right directly behind it, you have three bones. You have one that's called the malleus, one that's called the incus or the anvil, right? And what do you hit an anvil with? You hit it with a mallet or a hammer, right? It's called malleus because it looks like a mallet. The incus looks like an anvil, so they call it the anvil. Okay, or the incus, you can call it either name. So the hammer and the anvil, or the mallet and the anvil. And then here you have what's called the stapes. And the stapes kind of looks like a wishbone to me, or a tuning fork, or a field goal post, right? On a football field, a goal post on a football field. Okay, and these three bones are the smallest bones in the skeletal system, and they are inside of your ear. And they will vibrate along with the tympanic membrane, and then it'll send that information to this portion of the ear here, which is part of the inner ear. And this whole piece here, okay, this thing here is called the cochlea. Okay, this looks like a snail shell. Okay, and that cochlea is going to merge into your cochlear nerve and vestibular nerve, which gives the information directly to the brain. But above the cochlea are these semicircular canals, which are these tubes that form in different directions that are filled with fluid. And those fluids are going to be used to give you your equilibrium. Okay, your inner ear is responsible for you having balance. If you throw off the balance of the fluid in those tubes, you become dizzy. So that's why if you spin around in a chair, or if you hit your head on something, or if you have sinus pressure, it can change how the inner ear liquids situate themselves in those semicircular canals and cause you to be dizzy. Okay. Also, last thing I want you to know here on this model is this tube here that comes off of the tympanic cavity, and it's called the eustachian tube. The eustachian tube leads directly into your throat. Okay, that's why you go to an ear, nose, and throat doctor, because they're all connected. The ears are connected to your throat. Your nose is connected to your throat. So that's why you go to an ear, nose, and throat person. Okay, if you ever had or known anybody who has gotten tubes in their ears, okay, they have put plastic tubes into the eustachian tubes of the individual so that the eustachian tube can drain during an infection, right? So if someone, the reason people get tubes put in their ears is because they get chronic ear infections, which means that, liquid gets in here, typically kind of some type of like lake water, pond water, tub water, whatever. Whenever I was like that when I was a kid. If I looked at a pond the wrong way, I would get an ear infection. But if you get liquid in this part of your ear and it doesn't drain out of this tube, okay, it festers and then bacteria can grow and you get an ear infection and you have to take antibiotics or drops. But if you put tubes in the ears, it keeps these eustachian tubes from collapsing or being too thin, and therefore the liquids can drain out of them a lot easier, and therefore you reduce the risk of bacterial infection and ear infections. Okay, so that is going to do it for this lesson. If you have any questions or comments, make sure you leave it in the comment section, or you can always email me with any questions that you have, and I will see you next time. Have a good one.